All right, at this time it gives me profound pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight, author of many books, many articles in recognized national magazines. She's a true Dahlonega treasure and has been known to make some very good cranberry butter, enjoys a good cup of tea and a great story. I'd like to welcome our very own Dahlonega's Ann Amerson.
It was a decade ago, maybe close to 20 years, when Bella Lynn, who Robbie was talking about, was the program chairman. And on one occasion, she got concerned because the speaker had let her know that he wasn't sure he was going to be able to make it. It was, I don't know what the circumstances were, but she was really worried that we were going to show up there and nobody would be doing the program. So she looks at me and says, "Why don't you start working on a Plan B talk?" And I says, but Bella, it's only 3 days till the meeting, and besides, I hadn't done much public speaking at that time. And she said, he thought a minute. She said, "You did the Meaders, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, tell them about Mr. Bob." Well, with some people, it's easier to go ahead and do what they want you to do than it is to explain to them why you can't do it. So I capitulated at that point. And I found a number of articles and started reading, and I soon became very intrigued by everything. I was really fascinated by the Meaders family in general and Mr. Bob in particular. And so much so that when Bella called me Thursday morning to let me know the speaker was confirmed and I was off the hook, I actually felt a little disappointed, a little relieved too. Since speakers had already been arranged for the rest of the year, I put my notes about the Meaders family away and never thought again about doing a program about the Meaders until a couple of months ago. I can't remember how that came about then, but it must be an idea whose time had come, because here I am. And this time I've had lots of time to prepare, maybe even 20 years. In 1867, the population of Dahlonega increased by 2 when Barney Ray Meaders and his wife Mary Mays Meaders moved to this community. 4 years later, they had a son whom they named Robert Christopher Meaders. He was named for his grandfather, who was Christopher Columbus Meaders. And that name proved to be prophetic because Robert's life was a constant sequence of adventures and explorations and discoveries for the next 95 years. When young Robert Christopher Meaders was only 6 years old, he was already delivering merchandise from his father's general store located on the east side of the square at what people were already calling Meadows Corner. By the time Bobby was 10, he was a driver for the hack line between Dahlonega and Gainesville, which his family owned and operated. And thanks to Chris, well, I didn't know what a hack was. I knew it was some sort of conveyance, but I had no idea what it looked like. So my good friend Chris got online and he came up. He assures me that's not the color they really are. He was just running low on ink. But after looking at the pictures of the hacks, my definition is that the hack is somewhere a cross between a regular old wagon and a stagecoach. Well, anyway, Bobby, on one occasion when he was a driver, he discovered that the elderly gentleman who were among the passengers who were being brought back to Dahlonega was none other than, anybody take a guess? Benjamin Parks, the man who's generally credited with being the first to discover gold in North Georgia. In future years, Bobby would, when he grew up, he would tell his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren everything he could remember, because Uncle Benny, as Parks was called, regaled all of the other passengers while they were traveling telling him stories about how he was on his birthday back in 1828. He was out deer hunting and he kicked up a rock, a piece of quartz, and it had a sparkle to it. Made him think that it was gold, and it was. The significance of all this is that Bobby Meaders heard this. I forgot to tell you, this was about 1885 when Bobby was 14. But he heard Park's stories. It would be another, it wasn't until 1894 that the reporter from the Atlanta paper came up and interviewed him, printed the stories that he'd already been told. Bobby's next job was carrying the mail on horseback across the mountains to Blue Ridge in Fannin County. Since he was doing a man's work, folks started calling him Bob instead of Bobby's. When Bob Meaders was 22, he decided that he was going to make money on his own instead of working for his father. In those days, the Bell Telephone Company did not install its own distance lines, but rather contracted the work. And they had recently advertised for bids to build a line from Atlanta to Macon. Well, Bob didn't know anything about telephones or telephone lines. But you can't stop him from putting in a bid. A short time later, Bob received a message to come to Atlanta to meet with the president of the company. When the president suggested that he revise his bid, Bob drew himself up and replied he could not do it for a penny less. As it turned out, his bid was lower than the next lowest bid. It's half again as much as the next lowest bid. He explained that all the other bidders had presidents and construction superintendents and fancy offices and stenographers. And since all he had were mule teams and wagons and a few workmen, he could afford to do the job for less. Southern Bell gave him the contract. After digging all those post holes, how many post holes there would be between Atlanta and Macon? You might want to venture again. It's all like looking at this great big jug of beans and guessing how many there are. Well, anyway, he got the contract. He dug the holes and raised the poles. He bought several pairs of spurs and practiced climbing. He also learned how to attach the two telephone wires to glass insulators on the tops of the poles. After Bob successfully completed the contract to provide telephone poles from Atlanta to Macon, he was called back to the Atlanta office. And he was told that they were going to become a national company and would do their own construction in the future. When they offered him the position of construction superintendent, he reportedly turned it down because he didn't think it had much future. Personally, I think that he just didn't want to be away from Dahlonega that much. He once said that he was never lonely as long as he could see the mountains. And the mountains weren't visible from Atlanta or Macon.
That's true.
The first attempt to bring telephone service to Dahlonega was made sometime prior to 1900 by Bob Meaders when he endeavored to connect the Consolidated Gold Mining Company in Dahlonega with the Bell Telephone Exchange in Atlanta. This line consisted of a strand of iron wire suspended from trees along the roadway. However, this line came to an abrupt halt when it got to a coming, having reached the end of what was called articulate transmission. I'm going to define that for us, Shannon. What is articulate transmission?
Well, I just meant that, over the distance, the signal weakens through that wiring. Eventually got to a point where if we went any further, we couldn't hear.
Okay, thank you for
Much
that
noise, I imagine.
explanation. In other words, it just didn't work anymore.
Well, iron's not the best. The copper obviously is better.
In 1900, Bob Meaders and three partners built a telephone line to Gainesville, where it connected with Southern Bell Telephone and Telegraph Company. This line successfully furnished telephone service to the Consolidated Mining Company, but also to North Georgia College, the Porter Springs Hotel, and last but not least, the Meaders store on the Dahlonega Square. The Bell Company engaged Meaders to be their Dahlonega agent and maintenance man. About 1910, Southern Bell sent a representative to Dahlonega to help Meaders solicit customers for telephone service to local residents as well as businesses. Bob didn't think that people in our small town would bother using telephones. But he agreed if they could get 100 subscribers, he would buy the exchange. By 10 o'clock the next morning, they had the necessary subscribers. 3 months after the exchange went into service, it was inadequate and had to be replaced. Yeah, this is an article I wrote a while back for 400 edition called Numbers Please When Telephones Come to North Georgia. And I brought this because it shows what the switchboard looked like. I can remember seeing the one here at the Meaders. It was this central, what she was called, the operator, had a cord that with a metal jack on the end that she had to plug into holes when, I don't understand it, but anyway, at least you know what it looks like there. Oh, that's the Standard Telephone Company. They have a little museum in Cornelia.
Yeah.
They only open on demand, I think. But it was very interesting. We never could figure out which of those switchboards might have been one used here in Dahlonega, but there was no identification. Bob Meaders went to the telephone exchange at 5 a.m. and he ran it until the operator came on at 7 a.m. Central, as the operator was known, worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 6 p.m., 6 days a week. You do the math, how many hours a week that is. During those hours, Mr. Bob installed new telephone lines, new telephones, or repaired old ones. He operated the exchange himself from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. If a call came in after he went to bed, a buzzer would sound and he would hurry downstairs to the exchange. Such late night calls were usually emergencies, somebody calling for a doctor or to report a fire. When a fire was reported, Bob ran out the door into the square, firing his pistol into the air and yelling, "Fire, fire!" It's all right, fire department. He then rushed back upstairs to dress and run to the scene of the blaze to help put it out. Bob Meaders not only brought the first telephones to Dahlonega, he and his brother Frank also brought the first automobile. The more he and Frank heard about this new horseless carriage, the more they wanted to acquire one of those newfangled inventions. So they saved up their money and they traveled to Atlanta in May of 1906. There they purchased a new Rambler. I originally said Nash Rambler, but Chris caught me on that. It wasn't Nash back then, but it was Rambler. They purchased a new Rambler and they learned how to drive it. Frank was eager to drive the vehicle to Dahlonega, but Bob had to get home sooner. So he caught the train to Gainesville and went to a livery stable there and hired a horse and buggy to get him to Dahlonega. I don't understand how that's faster than driving the car, except the car had a number of flat tires and the like. When Frank and the Rambler finally reached the outskirts of Dahlonega, Bob was waiting for him with a team of horses to help the car get up the hill. You gotta realize now, there was no 400 back then. The way we went to Atlanta when I was a child, from here to Dawsonville, on what had to be the windiest road in the whole state. And so they got to almost to town. They were probably at the King Creek Bridge, still Dawsonville Highway, I guess. And you know what a long, continuous hill that is. Well, when they finally got there, Bob was waiting for them with a team of horses to help the automobile ascend the long, steep hill from King Creek into town. When they reached the top of the hill, just beyond the college, about where the cemetery is, it was after midnight. Frank asked anxiously, "Is there anybody in town watching for our arrival?" "The square is full of people," Bob assured him. "Well then, untie the horses," Frank told his brother. I'm gonna drive this thing into town or I'm gonna tear it up. So, when Frank, Bob unhitched the horses and took them home a back way, and Frank proudly drove the new Rambler into town to the excitement and cheers of all the citizens gathered on the public square, waiting to see the first automobile come to Dahlonega. Doesn't that just make you want to be there witnessing that scene, cheering for that Rambler? Mr. Bob Meaders was president of the Bank of Dahlonega. The Bank of Lumpkin County. When he was awakened by an ominous telephone call around 2 a.m. on February the 14th of 1913. The caller said he had been awakened by an unusual noise. When he got out of bed to investigate, he discovered that robbers were breaking into the bank next door. In little Captain Hall's little office building, it's a shop now, between the Hall block and Hall's house. Pulling on his pants and pocketing his pistol, Mr. Bob told his wife Maggie to call the sheriff. Going out by way of the back door, he then made his way behind the buildings that were facing on the square until he paused to wait for the sheriff to arrive. The robbers had posted a lookout next to the courthouse, and when the lookout saw Miss Maggie Meadows appear in the window at the telephone exchange, he fired shots in her direction, shooting out some of the glass. She quickly dropped to the floor, but managed to hold back the toggle switch, whatever that is, with one finger, while she rang the sheriff with the other hand. When the sheriff answered his phone, all he could hear was some ringing noise. But hearing gunfire coming from the direction of the square, he ran to investigate. When he met up with Mr. Bob and learned that bank robbers were trying to break into the bank, he gave Bob another pistol, and the four of them went down the sidewalk firing four guns, just like a scene out of a Western movie. This is the little building where the Bank of Lumpkin County, and this is Sharon Johnson, who was the director at the Gold Museum. For many days, she's holding the gun, one of the pistols there. Pass that one around. You know the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. At this point, the bank robbers broke and ran around the corner of Paul's block. A couple of days later, all five of them were found sleeping in a ditch over in the western part of the county, Neverville area. It came out at their trial that they had successfully robbed a number of banks and gotten into their safes, but they were apparently unfamiliar with the kind of safe that was in the Bank of Lumpkin County. It had two front doors. After drilling through the first door, they attempted to blast through the second door, but the explosion sealed it into the safe to produce what amounted to a solid steel box that could only be opened with a torch. So they got there just for desserts, I guess. In 1914, Bob's younger brother Frank was appointed postmaster of Dahlonega, and Bob became the assistant postmaster, going to the post office twice a day to help distribute the mail. At that time, it was the responsibility of the postmaster to provide the post office location. Dahlonaga's earlier post offices had been situated in various existing buildings, such as stores, hotels, and the like. But the Meaders brothers utilized the empty lot next door to the Meaders building, the store, to erect a fine two-story building on the empty lot there. This was in 1914 and was generally called the Meaders building. This is the post office side and this is the bank side. And sometime when you go into Connie's Ice Cream, look up at the ceilings in there. They're very interesting. Here is this is Meaders Corner, and this is the Meaders building, which became known as the what's it called? Is that, okay, I was thinking it had something to do with your parents. Never did, okay. In addition to bringing the first telephone exchange and the first automobile to Dahlonega, Mr. Bob also provided the first running water in Dahlonega. It wasn't for everybody, it was limited, but he put ram pumps in springs located north of town, and I'm sure you guys know what ram pumps are. When the city water system was set up in 1927 to provide water for the whole community, Mr. Bob was made the superintendent. For a number of years, he personally read every water meter in town and billed the users. Often while he was making his rounds, he was followed by a procession of children and dogs, like the Pied Piper. People of all ages affectionately addressed him as Mr. Bob. In his spare time, Mr. Bob measured every cadet at the college for uniforms, which he then ordered and personally delivered, and probably fitted too. He became a trustee of North Georgia College, and he served 7 3-year terms as commissioner of Lumpkin County. Dahlonaga's welfare was always his chief interest, and he had a hand in most of the town's activities throughout his long life. Originally, my talk stopped there, but I discovered I couldn't stop there, so bear with me. The narrative account I just told you about Mr. Bob's life didn't lend itself to inserting any other material about his family. So now I'm going to do an addendum to tell you about his wife and children and my family's connection with the Meaders family. Robert Christopher Meaders was married in 1896 to Maggie Field, who soon became affectionately known as Miss Maggie. They lived in the Meaders family home at Meaders Corner until about 1944, when they moved into the house at the corner of West Main and Church Street. If you can't think where that is, think about the front gate of the campus right across the street there. My family lived just up the hill, so I frequently saw them sitting out on their front porch. By this time, they were up in years, and so Mr. Bob probably slowed down a little bit finally. I remember watching them plant a Japanese magnolia tree that wasn't any taller than I was when they put it in the ground. And I have watched it grow over the years into the huge tree that it is today. How many of you noticed it when it blooms in the spring? It's covered with beautiful pink blossoms, if there's not a late freeze. That always reminds me of the Meaders. The couple celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary just shortly before they were elected as King and Queen of Gold Rush in 1956. Sally Sorahan, a Historical Society member, who's not with us tonight, unfortunately, her book, Gold Rush Days in Dahlonega, The History of a Mountain Festival, described how Robert and Maggie Meaders drove up in a horse-drawn sawyer with French on the top. Mayor Joe Woodward and Henry W. Moore served as coachmen, and an honor guard from the college, the cadets, accompanied the carriage to the stage on the public square. Mr. Bob and Miss Maggie had 3 children. Their daughter Margaret was born in 1906, which was a year before my mother, and the 2 of them became good friends. Unfortunately, Margaret suffered badly from arthritis, and she ended up having to move to New Mexico. Found that the climate there was so much better for her that she could get rid of her crutches. She and my mother, Marion Dismukes, stayed in touch by mail over the years, and I remember when Margaret came to visit in 1982, which was shortly after we moved back. She made this final visit to Dahlonega to deliver an address on the occasion of Lumpkin County's 150th anniversary. Margaret was a very talented writer, and my mother kept copies of all the various articles that Margaret published over the years. These included stories about her family and the early days in Dahlonega, which were published in the AJC and other publications. So now my secret's out, you know why I know so much about the Meaders. I didn't realize I knew that much about the Meaders, actually. Well, Margaret's brother Robert was a 1929 graduate of North Georgia College, and he too made a final trip to Dahlonega about 2001 to attend a college class reunion. He was 92 at the time, and he lived in California. I didn't remember him because when he moved away, I didn't even know who he was. I was a gay guy. But we were soon talking a mile a minute about his parents, and he shared a lot of memories, his memories about them. We stayed in touch by mail after he returned home. So I never did know when he died, but he, after 10 or something else, he were still with us. I know that some of you may be wondering if there is any connection between our Dahlonega Meaders and the Potters of Mossy Creek. Yes, some of you thinking about that? Well, I don't know about Mr. Bob's grandfather, Christopher Columbus, if he was a Potter or not. But I do know that John Milton Meaders, the brother of Mr. Bob's father, Barney Ray Meaders, in other words, Bob's uncle, makes it a lot easier. He opened Meaders Mossy Creek Pottery in 1893. Well, since Chris Warwick has been researching the origin of Dahlonega street names and has recently written an article about Meaders Street, we've been swapping information, and I'm going to give him the last word. While going through microfilms at the library, he ran across an article that Mr. Bob Meaders wrote about the, quote, long and interesting history of Dahlonaga's telephone system, which was published in the February 27, 1953 issue of the Dahlonega Nugget. In his article, R.C. Meaders, Mr. Bob in other words, told how he had made the prediction to 3 Dahlonega businessmen that someday we'll talk to distant places without wires. He reported that Colonel Baker's response was, "Bob, you better take that telephone out of your store and burn it because it's already run you crazy." That concludes my presentation, but I know there are at least 2 people here who are natives and remember the Meaders, and I would like them to share some of their memories there. Willie? Daryl? Vicki? Anybody else? Anybody else can remember the Meaders?
Now, I live next door to Lou. I don't know, they're not very long because they moved to, what was it, North Carolina? Where were they again?
That was what their older daughter, they
Yeah.
lived here, they were not gone from Dahlonega for more than a few days at a time, I don't
Yeah.
think.
Well, anyway, and I vividly remember, but they sold their house to the Wicks
Mm-hmm.
in 1960, and the house was kind of crude inside, because it really hadn't been updated. There's a bedroom downstairs, living room, dining room, everything. And he sold it to him on the condition that he could use the downstairs bedroom anytime he wanted. And when she died, he would come back to Golish, and they would walk in the house, and he would leave the bed. He took them up on it.
Well, see, he died in 1965, I think, and I have a gap there in my memory because I've been gone at that time. Thank you, Vicki. Daryl?
Yeah,
I think
all
Daryl's got some good
right,
stories.
photographs. Hi, I'm Daryl West. Here's a photograph of R.C. Meaders or Uncle Bob. This lady here was Isabel Lumpkin. She was a professor at North Georgia, and she was interviewing him. Just when she was real young. So I'm gonna pass these around. Vicki will recognize some of them. By the way, these photographs that I'm passing around were taken by a young photographer here in Dahlonega, Comedius Disby.
He wasn't that young.
He was, according to me and you, he was young. We thought he was old.
I forgot to pass out some of my pictures too. Let me just get these circulated. Chris found these pictures of the Meaders building online. I don't need to give them to you, but I'll just start these back here. And here are Mr. Bob and Miss Maggie as Gold Rush King and Queen. And here's Margaret, their daughter, and Robert, their sons.
The house she's referring to is the one that Bill Scott has. It's got the picket fence around it.
Oh, yeah.
That's the house. And then Vicki where the bank is, they had a big two-story house across the road from it. They moved the two-story house, Crown Mountain. It mysteriously burned. The guy that owned it had a sawmill that mysteriously burned. He had a planing mill that mysteriously burned. He built a new house on Crown. Oh, he built a new house over there where that new construction, that new building for muscular dystrophy or whatever it is, near Danny's Restaurant. He built a house back in there, and it burned. And it burned the refrigerator up, it burned the air conditioner, it burned everything up. So anyway, he didn't know. He wasn't proven guilty of anything, so I'm sure it's just all an accident. But the funny part about the telephone company, you know, we had that old phone company until I come back from Young Harrison, 60, went to school at Young Harrison, came back in 61. But up until then, we had the old plug-in telephone. And it was located on one of those photographs, the wooden building, the Meaders wooden building. It was upstairs at the wooden building. And there were two operators. One was Golda Lee Henderson and Grace Boyd. Well, when you made your phone, when you wanted to call somebody, you'd say, like my grandfather was 12W and my uncle was 12J.
Ours was 6OW.
Ours was 94. But anyway, so if you got Grace Teague on there and you can recognize the voice, you can say, Uncle called his number, Granddad's number, and that, you know. But if you got Golda Lee Henderson on there, us kids, you know, we'll call up, try that. You'll have to use the number, please. So a lot of times when we found out Golda Lee was there, it just hangs back up. She was crabby. Grace was pretty nice. But Mr. Meaders, I don't remember a whole lot of him climbing, you know, the poles or whatever. I think they messed over that to standard. But anyway, I do remember that he was the water company. The water supply, you know where the landfill is, where you take your trash to the landfill? If you go down there on the left side, there's a big cupboard there, and a pump sitting there. Well, that supplied all the water into Lumpkin. And they had up on Faculty Hill, they had when I say Faculty Hill, that would be, I'm backing up too much. There was a water tower up where the health services building is at North Georgia. And, by the way, you know where I live somewhere near the Meadows house, and I had a .22 rifle, and when I was real young, I tell this, they may put me in jail, but I'd shoot over there and hit that water tank, and I could hear it ping. I could tell where it had water and it didn't have water. I didn't do that 2 or 3 times and then put it up.
Did you cause any leaks?
No, it didn't. It's too thick to cause leaks at that.
Or is it
Yeah. Now, if I'd have used a 30-06 or something like that, it might have. It would have, wouldn't it? Well, I'm getting off track here. Oh, about Mr. Meaders. He had some kind of, she's right, we wouldn't follow him around. He's a real friendly fellow. He was in his 70s, 80s. He'd about like me now. But he'd walk all over town with his little book. And he had he had his knee pads on, and he had something looked like a hook, ice hook, like they used to take ice with, and it'd reach in and take the lids off the water meter. So he'd carry that in his little book, and his knee pads, and walk all over town. I don't know how long it took him to do that.
Were the knee pads to get down to get to?
Knee pads, so when he got down, when he got down to reading the meter, wasn't getting his
I
knees.
wondered what those were.
Yeah. But, she was talking about him dying in 95. 93 or 94, Deloniga had a, how old was
He died when he was 95, it was in 1965, I think, he died.
Well, I guess mayor, we had a lady mayor. J.C. Garner was lady mayor here in Deloniga, and in Norfolk, Virginia, they had a dedication of different, apparently, different little towns had tugboats named after them. So several people from Deloniga went up for the dedication
On the tugboat to
of the
London.
tugboat Deloniga. And they just, I'll tell you some more. But anyway, and so Mr. Meaders was about 92, 93, and he wanted to go. So Daddy told him, well, I'll carry you up there. So my brother, my twin brother, and he, and Mr. Meaders and Daddy drove up to Norfolk. And Daddy always says, well, they gave us a tour, later on they gave us a tour of some kind of big ship. And Daddy said, well, he got around better than I did. He can climb up and down those posts, you know, at 93. But about that Deloniga tugboat, then again in, what was it, 94, 95, they decommissioned that tugboat. What they did, they turned it over to civilian contractors and did away with those crews that did that. And a lot of people, Billy Moore was, I guess it's what, 50 years, 30 years later? I don't remember. But anyway, we went up and decommissioned it. And there was even some talk about bringing it back down to the line of the transportation costs.
Yeah, I'm
were
afraid we're
expensive.
out of time, but we appreciate your coming and sharing some of your personal memories of the Meadows.
All righty, enjoyed it.
Thank you.
What?
A story about a chauffeur that was lost in water from Dawson County, is that true?
I haven't heard it, I don't know.
And it's a story that I heard from someone about the Meaders family that, there was a chauffeur that was lost in Dawson County and came to Deloniga, and they actually hid him out in the house because they had a posse or something out.
That's, I thought I'd heard everything tonight.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Just to get it straight, was the Meaders home what's now Bill Scott's home?
They moved there in about 1944, yes.
Okay.
Before that, they lived, Meadows Corner just kept getting bigger and bigger. At first, the family lived upstairs, then they lived back behind.
Where's Meaders Corner now?
Oh,
What
where the
is this?
fudge factory is.
Okay,
That's it, there's a picture going around somewhere.
okay, that's, and
So that building-
the switchboard, the telephone, was that in Norman Adams, Donna Logan?
No, it was either, it was two places. It was downstairs on street level in the, yeah, where they tore the old Meadows Corner down. Look, there's a picture of it somewhere.
Well, and when Georgia Power moved downstairs, they moved the telephone company upstairs.
Ah, is that what they
And
did?
then later on, that little building that Ariama has, the Wimpy building,
Yeah.
they moved it down there.
Okay. And what was it, was there another company that was in what's now Connie's Ice Cream?
Oh, there's been a lot of business. Ledbetter's Pharmacy was there. for-
But one of the Meaders was one?
No, no.
Okay.
That was the post office. You see, in those days, the post office did not provide a building. The local postmasters had to provide a building.
So in that photo right there, who are the two gentlemen again? In that photo there, who are the two gentlemen at the bottom?
Fred Fitz is one of them. I forget who the other one is. If you look closely, you can see here the letters, post
And
office.
so is that the building on the right side of the stairs?
Yeah, the right side of the stairs was the post office, the left side was the bank. I guess they rented out the upstairs just
No,
as we do today.
I thought eventually the whole post office took the bottom stairs.
Oh, that's right, I had forgotten that.
And the
Thank you
bank
for
moved
reminding me,
upstairs.
Sean. Yeah, eventually the post office took over the
The whole
whole
bottom.
thing.
So it's what, Norman Adams, I guess, on the right? Is that what it
They
is?
never got that far.
What's on the right there now? There's Connie's on the left side of the door, so what's on the
wine
line?
side.
Along the wine tasting, so I.
Habersham. It's the Brickfront building.
Well, what was it? Okay, that's where the Bank of Lumpkin County, where the robbers were attempting to break
That was
into.
the first thing we moved.
And that was right here.
Yeah, this building was supposed
This
to.
bit. So that's now the rusted buffalo.
Right,
Yes,
yes.
isn't the safe still in the back of that building?
There is a safe there, but it's not the same one. I think that one was, by the time they fused it all together, they could just dispose of it.
There's still a safe in there.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Any other questions?
There was an article in the Nugget last year about one of the nephews of the Meaders family came back to town and brought a good many papers that had belonged to the family and presented those to the Lumpkin County Library. So anybody's interested in that kind of research, there should be a trove of literature that he brought back.
There's two other things I would like to tell you. One is that if you want to see a really big copy of that picture, I was at Cranberry Corners a while ago, and she's got this picture, huge, up on the side of the wall. You can see a lot more detail, like for instance, the steps going up. The Meaders family originally lived upstairs, but later back, their lot extended all the way back to the brick building that's the furniture, used to be the furniture store, and now it's a antique mall. The other thing I didn't want to remember to do is to thank Manny. I wanted to use that picture, and I wanted, more than just, you could see just passing around small ones. So Manny took it and blew it up, and brought it tonight, taped it up here so you can able to keep him in mind's eye for the whole piece.
Let me just cover different post offices, when it went from that post office up to the Woodland World Building, which is the Cranberry Corners, and that was about 1945. And then then it went to Regent's Bank, their old Regent's Bank building. What year was that? And then, of course, it's got the dome now.
Well, thank you so much, Chris.
For this photograph, this was on the front cover of the Delaware Nugget in 1950-something, I forget the actual date. But it was on the occasion when the phone company was installing a new system, and they allowed Mr. Meaders to make a long-distance phone call. And he called his daughter, who was out in California, or Colorado rather, at that point. So that was on the front page of the Nugget. That's what the photograph came from.
So is that a regular black? Yeah, okay. That was about, like I said, that was about 60, 69, 59, 60, somewhere along
Thank you all for coming out tonight, and we might just close with a moment of thinking about all the people who are no longer here because of 911. Take care of their loved ones. And thank you again for coming, and have a safe trip home, and see you next Monday.
Thank you.
That we'd like to give our guest speaker a book or some type of recognition for coming in to speak to us. But since Ann has written half the book and has the other half, we're kind of like limited. So we'd like to give her a gift certificate, which has no expiration date, for a dinner on us from the board members and officers of the Historical Society.
Oh.
Very much like-